Every Sunday at 3 p.m., I'd sit by the window with my tea, chamomile with just a drop of honey, and wait for the phone to ring. That's when Ellie and Jackson used to call. It was our little ritual. "Hi, Grandma," they'd say in unison, like a choir of joy that filled the room louder than any church bell ever could. But last Sunday, the phone stayed silent. I told myself they must have been busy, maybe school projects, maybe a family outing. Life gets hectic when you're young. I waited another 10 minutes, then 20. Still nothing. So I picked up the phone and dialed Ellie's number. Straight to voicemail. "Hi, sweetheart. Just wanted to hear your voice. Hope you're doing okay. Love you." I ended the call and placed the phone back on its cradle, like it was made of glass. The next day, I tried again. Same result. Then again. Then Jackson's number. Voicemail. No ring, no click, no hello. It was like someone had quietly pulled the thread that connected us, and I hadn't noticed until I was holding the frayed end in my hand. I sat at my kitchen table, tracing the rim of my mug, heart pounding harder than I cared to admit. I thought of the last time we spoke. Ellie told me about her science fair project. Jackson was excited about his new bike. Everything had seemed fine. No tension, no signs of distance. So where had they gone? By Wednesday, I couldn't focus on anything. I left the television on for company, but the voices didn't fill the silence the way their laughter used to. I baked a batch of snickerdoodles, Ellie's favorite, and wrapped them up in a tin, thinking I might drop by the house. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe their phone had issues. Maybe Susan had forgotten to pay the bill. That's the thing about silence. It's never just silence. It's suspicion. It's worry. It's grief dressed up like patience. Thursday morning, I stood at my front door with that tin of cookies in one hand and my coat in the other. But I didn't move. I just stood there. What if they didn't want to see me? What if something had changed and no one had the heart to tell me? What if the silence was intentional? I set the cookies on the counter and sat back down, my eyes drifting toward the family photo on the mantel. Me, Brian, Susan, and the kids, smiling like we'd never know sorrow. I whispered into the stillness, "Why haven't you called me?" But the room had no answer, just the soft ticking of the clock, marking time since the last sound of their voices. By Friday, the ache in my chest had settled into something colder, something heavier. I kept picking up the phone and putting it down again, like I was holding a live wire. I knew it wouldn't connect. I knew what I'd hear. Voicemail. The same automated voice that used to be a bridge now turned into a wall. Still, I kept trying. That's what grandmothers do, isn't it? We try. Even when the door is shut, even when the lights are off, we knock gently, hoping someone forgot to open it, not that they locked it on purpose. I sat down with my old photo albums, the ones that smelled faintly of lemon oil and thyme. Ellie as a baby, wrapped in a sunflower blanket I crocheted with my own hands. Jackson's 5th birthday, he had frosting all over his face, and I can still hear him laughing. Those memories rang louder in my mind than any ringtone ever could. I stared at the photos for hours, wondering if they remembered me the way I remembered them. Did they still love the bedtime stories I used to tell? Did they remember how we used to build forts out of couch cushions and read under a flashlight? I wrote them each a letter, real ones, pen and paper. My handwriting is shaky these days, but I wanted it to be personal. I told them how much I missed them, how proud I was, how my days didn't feel quite right without hearing their voices. I included a few Polaroids: Jackson with his grandfather's fishing rod, Ellie in the garden planting tulips beside me. I sealed the envelopes carefully, kissed them both, and mailed them the next morning. The woman at the post office, Cheryl, looked at me and said, "Sending something special?" I smiled softly. "Always. They're my heart walking around in the world." But weeks passed, and nothing came back. No letter, no call, no visit. I even checked my mailbox twice a day, like a schoolgirl waiting on a secret admirer. That's when something began to shift inside me. It wasn't just that they were busy. It wasn't just life getting in the way. This felt deliberate, coordinated, orchestrated. I started to replay my last conversations with Susan in my mind. She'd been distant the last time we spoke, vague, quick to change the subject whenever I asked about the kids. Brian had been more passive, detached, distracted, like he was trying not to pick sides, even though his silence already had. I remembered how Susan once said, "They don't need to be spoiled by too much attention," after I gave Ellie a bracelet for her birthday. I thought she was just being strict. Now I wondered if that was her way of drawing a line. So I sat there, redialing memories instead of phone numbers, trying to figure out when I stopped being family and started becoming something else, something inconvenient, something forgotten. I kept playing that last voicemail over and over again. It was from Ellie, left 3 weeks ago. Her voice was soft, rushed, full of innocent joy. "Hi, Grandma. Just wanted to say I got an A on my science project. I wish you could have seen it. Maybe next week you can come over. Love you." There was a faint giggle at the end, probably Jackson in the background saying something silly. And then, silence. That voicemail had become sacred to me. I'd play it in the morning while drinking my tea. I'd play it before bed, like a prayer. I knew the words by heart, but hearing her voice made me feel like I wasn't completely erased yet. Like somewhere, in that busy world of theirs, they still remembered the woman who taught them how to tie their shoes and wipe cookie dough off their noses. I didn't delete it. I couldn't. It felt like the only proof I had that we once shared something real. But one day, I accidentally tapped the wrong button. My heart stopped when I saw the screen flash. Deleted. I froze, staring at it like I'd just thrown a letter into a fire. My hands trembled as I tried everything to get it back, clicking through every setting on the phone. But it was gone. Just like that. The only recent piece of their voices I had left, erased by one wrong touch. I stared at the blank screen in disbelief, my breath caught in my throat. It was more than a message. It was a lifeline. It was a whisper from a time when I still mattered. I called Brian after that. He didn't answer. I texted, "Can we talk? I'm worried. Please." No response. Not even a read receipt. I waited an hour, then another, then a day, then two. The ache turned into something else, something bitter. Not anger, at least not yet. Just a slow, crawling sorrow that crept beneath my ribs and curled into my bones. I'd never missed a birthday. I'd never forgotten a recital. I was there when Susan had postpartum depression, rocking the babies so she could sleep. I drove across town at midnight once when Jackson had a fever, because Brian didn't know what to do. I was the one who held their little bodies close and whispered, "You're safe. Grandma's here." Now, I couldn't even get through. I sat on the edge of my bed that night, looking at my phone like it was some cursed relic. I realized something terrible, something that stuck to me like wet wool. They weren't just forgetting to call. Someone was making sure they couldn't. And that thought, that maybe I was being erased on purpose, that was the first time I felt a deep, bone-deep chill. Not from the cold, but from something else. Something worse. I was no longer being ignored. I was being shut out. After the deleted voicemail, I clung even harder to the old-fashioned things. Letters, photo prints, handwriting. Maybe I was being dramatic, but when the world stops answering you, you go back to what's real. What you can touch. What can't be erased with a swipe. So, I wrote again. 2 letters. One for Ellie, one for Jackson. I picked out the best stationery I had, cream-colored paper with a tiny gold trim around the edges. I chose my pen carefully. I always write better when I feel like I'm writing from the heart. I told them about the irises blooming in the garden, how the blue jays had returned to the oak tree out front. I told them I missed them every day, that I kept their pictures on my nightstand, that Grandma's house felt colder without their little feet running across the kitchen tiles. I folded each letter gently, like I was tucking them into a blanket. I kissed the envelope, just like I did when they were babies, and I'd kiss their foreheads before nap time. Then I walked 3 blocks in the wind to drop them off at the post office. The lady behind the counter, Cheryl again, gave me a warm smile. She knew me, knew I mailed things for birthdays, for holidays, for no reason at all. I stood there a little longer than usual that day, just watching her place the letters in the bin, watching them disappear from my hands. I asked, "How long do letters usually take to reach across town?" She said, "Should be 2 days at most." I nodded, but my heart whispered, "Or never." 5 days passed, then 10, then 12. No call, no text, no visit. I told myself maybe they read them and didn't know how to respond. Maybe it was awkward. Maybe Susan didn't like the idea of handwritten letters. It was old-fashioned after all. But the truth buzzed louder in my gut than any hopeful lie I could invent. I went into town the next weekend just to pass by their house. I didn't mean to look in. I'm not the spying type. But as I drove by slowly, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The mailbox flag was up. A bundle of envelopes rested inside. My envelopes, still sealed, still untouched. I pulled over to the side of the road, heart pounding like I'd been caught stealing. I watched the front door, expecting someone to come out. No one did. The house was alive. There were bikes on the lawn, shoes by the mat, cartoons echoing faintly from the open windows. But my letters? Forgotten. Or worse, ignored on purpose. I drove home slower than usual. My hands gripped the steering wheel too tight. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the empty seat across from me, the one Jackson used to take when we played checkers. And I finally asked out loud what I'd been afraid to admit. What kind of mother-in-law had I been? For her to keep my grandchildren from me. But the question echoed without an answer. Just me. And the letters they never even opened. You'd think after raising a child, after late-night fevers and scraped knees, after parent-teacher meetings and graduation hugs, you'd never find yourself locked out of their lives like a stranger. But that's exactly what was happening, slowly and painfully, and I could feel it with every unanswered call, every unopened letter, every polite smile that said, "You don't belong here anymore." I tried calling Brian again the next morning. It rang. That surprised me. It actually rang. My heart skipped. For a second, I believed he'd pick up, but it rang 6 times and then, You've reached Brian Whitlow. Leave a message. I didn't. Not this time. What was the point? I already knew the silence by heart. Later that day, I went to the farmer's market in town. I don't go for the groceries anymore, just to feel less invisible. I walked past the apples and the honey stand, gave a nod to Mr. Everett, who sells hand-carved spoons, and there she was. Susan, standing by the flower cart with Ellie. My breath caught. Ellie didn't see me. Susan did. Our eyes met for less than a second. She looked away immediately, nudged Ellie, whispered something, and turned. They left the cart, walked straight to their car. No hello, no wave, no recognition. I just stood there, holding a small bag of tomatoes like a fool. I didn't even realize I'd dropped one until it rolled under the cart, and a little boy handed it back to me with a smile. I mumbled a thank you, but my mind was racing. That wasn't accidental. That wasn't awkwardness or distraction. That was avoidance. I sat on a bench near the library and tried to breathe through the weight in my chest. I thought of Susan's smile from years ago. Warm, grateful, tired. The way she used to call me Mom after long days when Brian worked late. I thought of the nights I rocked her newborn to sleep so she could shower or rest. The meals I brought over. The way I gave her space, even when I wanted to help more. I thought I'd done it right. I truly did. But now I felt like an intruder. Later that evening, I called Cheryl from the post office. We'd grown close in a small town kind of way. Coffee talk, recipe swaps, quiet truths. I asked if she ever noticed Susan picking up any letters. She hesitated. Then she said, I shouldn't say anything, but last week I saw her take your letters and put them in her purse. She looked around like she didn't want anyone to see. I felt dizzy. So she was collecting them, hiding them. From whom? That night, I sat in the dark with just the lamp on, staring at the photo of my son's wedding. Brian, beaming. Susan, radiant. Me, right behind them, hands on their shoulders. How had that woman become the wall between me and my grandchildren? And why wasn't Brian tearing it down? That was the moment I realized this wasn't about forgetfulness. It was a decision. Someone had decided I didn't deserve to be part of their lives, and no one was stopping them. It was a gray Saturday morning when I decided to walk to their street, not to confront, not to speak, just to see. Sometimes you need to lay your own eyes on the silence to believe it's real. I pulled on my old coat, the one Ellie used to say made me look like a fancy lady detective, and wrapped my scarf tighter than usual. There was a chill in the air, but the cold didn't bother me anymore. It matched what I was carrying inside. Their street was quiet, just like always. The maple trees lining the sidewalks had begun to shed, the ground littered with amber and copper leaves. I slowed as I reached their house. There it was. White shutters, blue door, wind chime still hanging crooked on the porch. The same wind chime I had gifted them one spring. It was still there, but now it sounded like a stranger's melody. I stood across the street, pretending to look at the trees, my eyes darting toward the living room window. That's when I saw them. Inside, the fireplace was glowing. Jackson sat cross-legged on the floor with a puzzle, and Ellie was curled up on the couch with a book. Brian walked by carrying mugs. Hot cocoa, most likely. A perfect little scene, right out of a snow globe. Except it wasn't mine anymore. I wasn't part of it. I watched for a few minutes, half hoping someone would glance up and see me. Maybe Jackson would wave. Maybe Ellie would run out with a hug. But no one looked up. No one noticed. Then Susan entered the room. She bent down, kissed Ellie on the forehead, and looked toward the window. I froze. Her eyes passed right over me. I'm not even sure if she saw me, but I saw her. I saw the ease in her body, the calm on her face. She wasn't hiding the crime. She was simply moving on. I felt like a ghost, like someone who had died but never got the memo. I turned around and walked away slowly, my feet crunching the leaves like breaking promises. By the time I reached my block, tears were already making their quiet path down my cheeks. Not the kind that come from pain, but the kind that come from recognition, from knowing you've truly been replaced. Back home, I sat by the window again. I watched the clouds roll across the mountains like slow-moving waves, and I remembered the days when those children thought I hung the moon. They used to call me when they were scared of the dark. Now I stood outside their window, invisible in broad daylight. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I never thought I'd ask. If they're happy without me, do I even have the right to fight this? The wind chime in my backyard clinked faintly, and I remembered. No one silences a grandmother by accident. Someone had built a wall, and I was about to find out how thick it really was. The following week, I made a decision. I wouldn't stand on the sidewalk anymore, like a shadow begging for warmth. I'd knock on the door, like family, like someone who still had a name in that house. I didn't dress up, no makeup, no fresh-baked cookies, no flowers, just myself. A mother, a grandmother. Tired but not broken. I rehearsed my lines on the walk over. I just want to see the kids, just a hug, 5 minutes, no drama. I knew I'd be calm. I had to be. If I raised my voice, they'd twist it. Say I was being emotional. Say I was unstable. No, I would give them nothing to twist. Only truth. When I reached the front porch, I paused. The wind chime above my head rattled faintly. It used to be a welcome sound. Now it felt like a warning. I knocked twice, gentle but firm. I heard footsteps. Then the door creaked open, and there she was. Susan. Her expression didn't shift. No surprise, no warmth, no guilt. Just blank. Like a receptionist at a hotel where you have no reservation. Margaret, she said. Not Mom, not Grandma. Just my first name. I'd like to see the kids, I said softly. Just for a moment. She stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door halfway closed behind her. Now's not a good time. I nodded slowly. Susan, they haven't called, haven't written. I just want to know they're okay. They're fine, she said curtly. They're busy. We all are. I sent letters, I said. I know you got them. Her eyes flickered, just for a second. Then she straightened. We're trying to keep things simple, she said. There's been too much confusion lately. Too many expectations. Expectations? I repeated, stunned. I'm their grandmother. I just want to love them. She crossed her arms. And sometimes love is too much. It makes them dependent. We're raising them differently now. Differently, as if love had become a disease. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood there and asked one final question. Did you block my number from their phones? She didn't answer, not directly. She just said, we need space. This is best for everyone. She turned, closed the door gently but firmly. No slam, no harshness, just finality. I stood on the porch for a full minute, listening. No sound inside, no feet running to the door, no voices calling out, Grandma! I was just a name on her lips now, not a person, not a presence, a nuisance to be managed. When I walked home, the sky felt darker than usual, even though the sun was still up. And in that walk, I buried something inside me, a part of me that still believed in courtesy, in reason, in family. Susan had given me her answer, and I had heard it loud and clear. But I also knew one thing with certainty. If they weren't going to open the door, I was going to find another way in. A few days later, I ran into Linda from the church choir while I was buying yarn at the craft store. She was glowing with joy, practically bouncing in her shoes. "Margaret," she said, "Ellie did such a beautiful job at the school recital. You must have been so proud." I blinked. "Recital?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, yes," she said. "Last Friday at the high school, she played the violin solo. The whole auditorium stood up when she finished. I could have sworn I saw your son and his wife there with the kids." I nodded, pretending to remember. "Of course. Yes. I've just been so busy lately." She kept talking, but her words blurred. I felt like I was falling in slow motion. Friday. They'd had a recital. I hadn't been invited. I hadn't even known it was happening. I left the store in a daze, the skeins of yarn still in my basket. In the car, I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wasn't asking to be in charge of their lives. I wasn't meddling. I just wanted to see my granddaughter perform. I wanted to be in the room when she looked up from the stage and saw a familiar face beaming back at her. Instead, I was a ghost outside their lives, a placeholder in a memory they were trying to edit out. When I got home, I went straight to the drawer where I kept their old school programs: kindergarten, second grade, fourth, years of recitals, plays, spelling bees. Each one carefully saved and dated. I ran my fingers over the paper, my eyes burning. How did I go from front row cheerleader to nobody? I went online and checked the school website. There it was: Winter Strings Performance. Open to all families. No special invitations needed. I could have gone. I could have been there. But no one told me. Not Brian. Not Susan. I wanted to believe that Brian didn't know. That maybe Susan forgot to mention it. But that kind of forgetting isn't accidental. Not anymore. I called the school the next morning and asked if there was a video recording. The secretary said yes. They'd be posting it soon. I thanked her, then hung up and cried for 15 minutes straight. Not out of sadness, not only. It was something else now. Anger. A deep, raw anger that sat in my chest like a lump of iron. They didn't just forget to tell me. They made sure I wouldn't be there. They had rewritten the story of that night so that I no longer existed in it. And as I sat there, wiping my eyes and staring at the quiet fireplace, I said it aloud to myself, steady and certain. They've made me an outsider in my own family. But even outsiders can speak up. Even ghosts can knock loud enough to be heard. I didn't know how yet, but I was done waiting. I hadn't wanted to stoop to it. I told myself I respected boundaries, even when they made no sense. But that night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the questions kept clawing at me. Why hadn't they answered? Was it just Susan? Was Brian involved? Did Ellie and Jackson even know I was reaching out? I had to know. So I picked up my phone and scrolled through old texts. It took a while. Arthritis in my thumbs doesn't mix well with tiny screens. But I found it. The group thread. Family Chat was what we had named it. Ellie picked the emoji. As I scrolled, I realized the last messages were from months ago. My last one said, "Hope you're all safe during that storm last night. Call if you need anything." No one ever replied. But it had been marked as delivered. I tapped on the info icon out of curiosity. That's when I saw it. The thread had only one recipient now, Brian. Ellie and Jackson were no longer in the group. Their contact names were gone. Deleted. My heart started pounding. I scrolled again, back through pictures of school art projects, camping trips, Ellie's cookie baking disaster when flour covered the dog, all the laughter, emojis, heart reactions. And then, nothing. Cut off like a faucet. I switched to Ellie's individual thread. No contact found. Jackson's, too. The entire history, gone. Not even archived, just wiped. It felt like being erased from a photo, except I could still remember the moment it was taken. I stood up and grabbed the dusty photo album from the bookshelf. Inside were all the memories they'd tried to forget. Jackson's 3rd birthday, Ellie's first piano recital, the matching Halloween costumes we sewed together. These pages told a truth that the phone no longer would. I sat down at the dining table and stared at my own handwriting, scribbled in the margins of the photos. Ellie's missing tooth. She cried until I told her she looked like a pirate. Those memories were real. They were mine. And no one could delete them. But if Susan had removed me from their digital world, it meant she had full control over how the kids remembered me. Out of sight, out of mind. That's what she was banking on. And the worst part? It was working. The silence wasn't just a side effect. It was the goal. That night, I printed out some of the photos and began writing letters again. But this time, they weren't going to Susan's house. This time, I was going to find another way to reach the kids. Because if they wouldn't let me in through the phone, I'd knock on the door of their memory. And I'd knock hard. I always believed there were different kinds of smiles. Some were warm and involuntary, like Ellie's smile when she opened a birthday card and found $5 inside. Others were polite, distant, masking the chaos underneath. And then there were the calculated ones, the ones that spoke without sound, the ones that said, "I know exactly what I'm doing, and you can't stop me." That's the kind Susan wore when I saw her again. It was at the town library during the annual book donation drive. I go every year, bringing a few well-loved novels and a tray of lemon bars. It gives me something to do, and I like seeing the kids run around the children's corner. I didn't expect to see her there, but of course she was, standing beside the community table with a clipboard in one hand and her cell phone in the other. She looked perfect as always. Pulled together hair, spotless sweater, that kind of poised presence that made others think she was made of grace. She spotted me before I spotted her. When I turned from the bake sale table, our eyes locked. And that's when she smiled. Not a smile that said, "Hello?" Not a smile that said, "I'm sorry." A smile that said, "You're no threat to me." I walked past her without a word, but I felt her gaze on me like a cold wind pressing against my spine. She knew. She knew I'd been trying to reach the kids. She knew I'd come to the house. She knew I was unraveling the truth. And it didn't faze her. I sat down at one of the reading tables near the children's section, pretending to flip through a gardening magazine while my mind raced. Susan wasn't just keeping the kids away. She was rewriting the entire narrative. She was the mother, the gatekeeper, the historian, and I was becoming a footnote. Later, as I was leaving, I heard her chatting with a woman by the bulletin board. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but her voice carried. "They just don't need the confusion, you know?" Too many opinions, too many old habits. We're trying to raise them with clarity. The other woman nodded sympathetically. "Of course. It's hard when grandparents overstep." Susan gave a breathy laugh. It's not about being cruel. It's about consistency. I walked away before I could hear more. I didn't want to know what else she was saying. I didn't want to hear how she was painting me into the villain of her carefully curated story. But as I stepped outside into the cold, I realized something. She wasn't keeping them from me because I was unfit, or unstable, or unkind. She was keeping them from me because I remembered who they were before she got to decide. And that made me dangerous. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to scream. But I was going to make sure they remembered me, clearly, truthfully, in ways she couldn't erase. And I knew exactly where I'd begin. The idea came to me in the middle of the night, as most unsettling truths often do. I was sitting in bed, flipping through an old yearbook, when it hit me. What if I'm not imagining this? What if they really can't receive my calls or texts anymore? Because someone made sure of it? I stared at my phone on the nightstand. Every attempt to reach them had gone nowhere. Voicemails, texts, even calls that never rang. It wasn't like them. Not the children I knew. Ellie would never ignore me. Jackson wouldn't forget his Sunday calls. Something was blocking the line between us. The next morning, I put on my wool coat and made my way to the cell phone store in town. The same place Brian had once dragged me to, trying to get me caught up on smartphones years ago. A young woman with a name tag that read Maya greeted me with a bright professional smile. "Can I help you today, ma'am?" I cleared my throat and leaned in, speaking low. "Yes, I need to check if someone has blocked my number. Is that something you can see?" Her smile dimmed just a little, replaced by a flicker of concern. "Well, we can't access other people's phones, of course. But if your number is being rejected automatically when you call specific lines, there might be something I can check. Are you trying to reach someone who shares your account?" I explained the situation gently. My son, my grandkids, and a long silence that didn't feel accidental. She nodded, clearly sensing the weight of what I wasn't saying. "Give me just a minute." She typed quietly for a while, glancing at the screen, clicking through tabs. I watched her face for any sign. Finally, she looked up, eyes soft. "I don't have full access to their devices, but I can confirm something. When a number is blocked on a user's phone, and you share a family plan or billing group, certain flags appear. You've been marked as restricted from outgoing connections to 3 numbers on this account. That's not automatic, ma'am. Someone did that manually." My breath hitched. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. She shook her head. "I can't say, but I'm really sorry." I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Maya. That's all I needed to know." I stepped out into the cold air, blinking back tears, my hands shaking as I gripped my purse strap. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being dramatic. I hadn't been forgotten. I had been cut off, intentionally. Susan had built a digital fence around my grandchildren, and I had walked face first into it over and over, thinking it was just the wind. But now I saw the bricks. I saw the gate, and I saw her fingerprints on every single one. For a moment, I felt rage like I hadn't felt since I was a young woman, standing up to a landlord who tried to cheat me on rent. But this was deeper, because this wasn't about property. This was about love, about legacy, about being erased while still breathing. And now that I knew the truth, I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. Not for Susan, not for Brian, and certainly not for their comfort. The word echoed in my mind for days. Blocked. Not missed. Not overlooked. Not forgotten. Blocked. I'd always thought of blocking as something teenagers did to rude classmates, or something you did to telemarketers. I never imagined I would live to see the day when I, a grandmother who once rocked those babies to sleep, would be treated like a threat. After the visit to the phone store, I didn't call Brian again. What was the point? He wasn't going to pick up. Maybe he wasn't even getting the calls. Or maybe he was, and he just didn't want to deal with me. I didn't know which was worse. I sat down at my kitchen table and opened the small wooden box where I kept all my special things. Inside were birthday cards from the kids, drawings they made for me, a poem Ellie wrote in second grade titled My Grandma is a Rainbow. I hadn't read it in years. I unfolded the paper slowly, my fingers tracing the pink crayon lines. She is warm like yellow, soft like blue. She smells like cookies and roses, too. I read it aloud 3 times. By the third, my voice cracked. I had always believed love was unbreakable. I thought being a good mother, a good grandmother, would shield me from abandonment. I thought loyalty, kindness, sacrifice, they counted for something. But now I saw how fragile it all was. One person, one decision, one swipe of a finger. That's all it took. I wondered if Ellie knew. Did Jackson ask why Grandma hadn't called? Had Susan told them I was busy, or tired, or away? Did they think I stopped caring? Or worse, had they stopped asking altogether? And Brian, my own son. He hadn't even sent a message to explain. Not a word. The boy who once cried into my chest after scraping his knee had grown into a man who now let silence speak for him. I took a long walk that afternoon, past the post office, past the park where I used to push the stroller, past the corner where Jackson once dropped his ice cream and cried so hard I gave him mine. I stopped at a bench and sat for an hour, watching the wind move through the trees. This town had seen my whole life, and now it was witnessing my quiet erasure. But here's the thing about erasure. It's only permanent if you let it be. So I walked home, opened a fresh journal, and started writing everything down. Every moment, every memory. A living testament of love they couldn't delete. I titled the first page, To Ellie and Jackson, What Your Grandmother Wants You to Know. And then I began. Not as a victim, but as someone who still had a voice. Even if they didn't want to hear it. It wasn't planned. I hadn't mapped out what I would say, hadn't practiced lines in the mirror, or written a letter to hand over. But something inside me reached its breaking point. Maybe it was the sound of the wind that night, tapping on the windows like the world trying to wake me up. Maybe it was that journal I started, filling page after page with memories and truths that no one else seemed to want anymore. I grabbed my coat and keys and drove straight to their house. I didn't call. I didn't text. I just drove. The roads were slick from the cold, but I didn't notice. My hands were shaking, but my jaw was set. When I pulled up, their house was glowing. The porch light was on. I could see movement in the living room. Ellie darting across with a bowl of popcorn, Jackson bouncing at the couch. Laughter, family, togetherness, everything I used to be part of, now playing behind glass like a movie I wasn't cast in. I knocked. Not timidly this time. Firm with purpose. Susan opened the door. She didn't look surprised. She looked tired, but she didn't say anything. I know you blocked my number, I said calmly. And I know you've been hiding my letters. Her face didn't flinch. This isn't the time, Margaret. No, I said. It's long past time. Brian stepped into view behind her. He looked startled, as if he hadn't expected to ever actually face me again. "Brian," I said, looking him straight in the eyes, "you owe me an explanation, and they—" I gestured inside, toward my grandchildren. "They deserve one too." He opened his mouth, closed it. Then finally he said, "Mom, things have just gotten complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, my voice rising despite myself. "Is that what you call shutting out the woman who raised you? Who helped raise them?" Susan stepped in front of him like a shield. "We needed boundaries." "No," I said sharply. "You needed control." She blinked. Her lips pressed together. I could see the restraint behind her eyes. "I've made mistakes," I said. "I probably said too much sometimes, gave too many gifts, hugged too long, loved too loud, but I was never dangerous. And I don't deserve to be erased." "You don't understand," she said. "No," I cut in, my voice now steady. "You don't understand. Those kids are not tools in some performance of perfection. They're people, and they have the right to choose who they love. You don't get to edit their memories like you edit your Instagram feed." Brian finally stepped forward, his voice low. "Mom, please. This isn't helping." I looked at him for a long time. "Then tell me what would help, Brian. Me disappearing? Is that what this has been about?" He didn't answer. I nodded slowly. "I see." And then I said the thing I hadn't said yet. The thing that had been building inside me since the silence began. "I'm not going to beg to be in my grandchildren's lives, but I will not let you lie to them about who I am. You can block my calls, my letters, even my presence, but you can't block the truth. Not forever." I turned to leave. My hands trembled as I gripped the railing. My chest hurt from the weight of everything I'd carried into that moment. And just as I stepped off the porch, I heard a soft voice from inside the house. "Ellie." Was that Grandma? Susan didn't answer, but I had heard it, and that one sentence was enough to keep my fire burning. She remembered me. The wall wasn't as tall as Susan thought. 3 days passed after the confrontation. I half expected Brian to call. He didn't. I imagined Susan might send a carefully worded message, something passive, veiled in civility. But no, nothing. Just the usual silence, now heavier than ever. So when Susan showed up at my front door, I was stunned. It was early afternoon. I was peeling apples for a pie I wasn't sure anyone would eat. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door, and there she stood. Gloves on, coat pristine, not a hair out of place. Her lips were pressed so tightly together they were almost invisible. "I won't stay long," she said flatly. "I just wanted to clear a few things up." I stepped aside, wordless, and let her into my living room. She didn't sit. She stood near the fireplace, as if claiming the space, while I sat on the edge of my old recliner. "You've made things difficult, Margaret," she began, tone clipped. "We've worked hard to keep a peaceful, focused environment for the kids, and all of this," she gestured vaguely, "it's disruptive." I leaned forward. "Disruptive?" "Susan, I'm their grandmother. I held them before you even stopped bleeding from giving birth. I have a right to—" She cut me off. "You had your time. Now they need stability, not someone who shows up unannounced, who writes guilt-laced letters, who's constantly looking for attention." I blinked. "Guilt-laced?" I asked, genuinely stunned. Her eyes narrowed, sharp now. "They don't need you anymore." The words hit like ice water down my back. My breath caught. "They have routines, friends, school. They're not toddlers clinging to your skirts. You cling to them." I stared at her. "You're afraid of something," I said quietly. You wouldn't go to all these trouble if I were truly irrelevant. She scoffed. I'm not afraid. I'm protecting them. From what? I asked. Love? History? A version of their lives that you don't control? She didn't respond. Instead, she looked around the room, at the framed photos, the patchwork blankets, the worn-down bookshelf. Then she said something I'll never forget. You're holding on to a role that no longer belongs to you, and if you cared about them, you'd let go. I stood slowly. You're right about one thing, I said. I am holding on. Not to control, not to interfere, but to remind them that real love doesn't vanish when it's inconvenient. Real family doesn't block, erase, or silence. Her jaw clenched. I don't expect you to understand, I added, because you've only ever built fences. I built bridges. Silence fell between us like a curtain. Finally, she turned to leave. Her final words, delivered over her shoulder, were as sharp as a slammed door. This is the last time we'll discuss this. I didn't stop her. I let her walk out, because I knew she was wrong about one thing. You don't get to tell a child they don't need their grandmother. That's something they decide for themselves. And I had a feeling. Ellie was already starting to remember. After Susan's visit, my house felt colder, not from the weather, but from the finality in her voice. The chill wasn't in the walls. It was in the cracks she'd left behind, the ones only someone you once loved like a daughter could carve so deeply. But the worst part? Brian still hadn't called. I waited. Foolishly, maybe. But I waited. I thought surely, after she came here, after everything that had been said, he'd reach out. Even just to smooth it over. Even just to say, I didn't know she was coming. But there was nothing. Just the steady hum of the fridge. The slow ticking of the mantel clock. The quiet ache of being invisible to your own child. I thought of the first time Brian said, Mama. He was 10 months old. We were in the backyard. He'd fallen into the grass and looked up at me, grinning, green blades stuck to his cheek. That day felt like magic. Now I couldn't even remember the last time he said my name. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was trapped in the middle. Maybe he was choosing peace over confrontation. But there's a point when silence stops being neutral. Silence, when it benefits the powerful, becomes complicity. I decided to write him a letter. Not a pleading one. Not even one seeking reconciliation. Just a statement, a truth. Brian, I'm not going to list all the ways I've shown up for you over the years. I don't need to. You know them. And maybe you've chosen to forget them. Maybe you've buried them beneath whatever version of the story you and Susan are comfortable with. But I need you to understand something. I raised you to be kind, to be loyal, to tell the truth even when it hurt. And right now, you are failing me. You are failing your children. They are growing up in a story where I've disappeared. And you're letting it happen. I don't want revenge. I don't want drama. I don't even want control. I just want the truth to survive. And if I have to carry it alone, I will. But you should know. There will come a day when Ellie or Jackson asks, "What happened to Grandma?" And you will have to look them in the eye and decide whether you will lie again. I hope you choose better than you've chosen now. Mom. I didn't sign it love, Mom. That word felt too soft, too generous. I sealed the envelope, addressed it in my firmest hand, and dropped it into the mailbox. No ceremony, no trembling, just truth sent through the wind. And when I got home, I sat by the window, not waiting for the phone to ring, but for the day when his silence would finally speak louder. than any words ever could. Because sometimes the real betrayal isn't a slammed door, it's the one that never opens. After sending the letter to Brian, something inside me shifted. Not all at once, but like the creak of old wood beginning to bend back into shape. I had spent months shrinking myself, wondering if I had done too much, said too little, loved the wrong way. But now that weight was lifting, not because the pain had gone away, but because I had finally given it a name. Erasure. That's what it was. They weren't just ignoring me, they were erasing me, and I wouldn't allow it. The next morning, I walked into town and paid a visit to an attorney. Not to sue, not for custody. I didn't want revenge, I wanted clarity. I wanted to know what rights I still had. Not just as a grandmother, but as a human being who had been deeply entangled in the care of those children for most of their lives. Her name was Deborah Chalmers. Gray hair, kind eyes, sharp mind. The type of woman who reminded me of myself 20 years ago, before the betrayals, before the silence. She listened carefully. I brought printed phone records, copies of my letters, even a photo of me holding Ellie at her first birthday party. I needed her to see I wasn't some stranger on the fringe. I was family. When I finished, she folded her hands on the desk and said, "You're not the first grandmother to come in here with a story like this." I blinked. "Really?" She nodded. "More and more, families are severing ties without warning. Grandparents get shut out. No explanation, no closure." "But what can I do?" I asked. "Legally?" She smiled gently. "You have the right to request court-ordered visitation, especially if you can show a history of close involvement in the children's upbringing." I sat back in the chair. "I don't want to drag them into court. I knew something was wrong," she continued, "but Mom kept saying you were busy, or traveling, or didn't want to come around." I looked at her, my Ellie, and all I saw was a little girl who used to fall asleep in my lap during thunderstorms. "I wanted to call you," she said. "I tried, but your number didn't work." I nodded. "That's because I was blocked." She winced. "I'm sorry, Grandma." "You have nothing to be sorry for," I whispered. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a bundle of my letters, creased and smudged from being read and reread. My handwriting stared back at me, shaky and hopeful. "I read everyone," she said, "even the ones with the old pictures inside. The one where you said Jackson looked like a mini Brian made me laugh so hard." We both smiled, that rare kind of smile that comes from shared pain being lifted, if only a little. "I'm so sorry they kept you away," she said again, her voice trembling. "I'm just glad you're here now," I said. She hesitated. "Can I visit again? I mean, if it's okay?" Tears welled in my eyes. "Ellie," I said, taking her hand in both of mine, "this will always be your home." She leaned in and hugged me tightly. "I missed you so much," she whispered. We sat together for an hour, talking about school, her favorite books, her growing curiosity about her dad's childhood. I showed her the old scrapbook I hadn't dared open in months. She laughed at baby pictures and gasped at an old birthday card she'd made me in kindergarten. When she finally stood to leave, she paused by the door. "You don't have to wait by the window anymore," she said. "I'm going to call you, every Sunday, like we used to." I smiled through tears. "I'll be here." And as I watched her walk back down the path, I realized the drawer Susan tried to hide those letters in wasn't deep enough, because love, once planted, always finds its way to bloom again. That Sunday, I set the table for one, but with two teacups, one for me, one for the memory. I placed the phone in the center, screen up like an honored guest. I didn't bake, didn't clean, didn't fuss. I just sat, waiting. At 2:59 p.m., the screen lit up. Call from Ellie. My heart skipped so hard it startled me. I answered on the first ring. "Hello, darling." "Hi, Grandma," she said, that old spark back in her voice. "I promised I'd call, and I keep my promises." My throat tightened. "Yes, yes, you do." We talked for almost an hour about school, her new math teacher, the boy in class who thinks being annoying is a personality. She asked about my garden, my knee, my apple pie recipe. Every topic was a thread weaving us back together. Then she paused. "Grandma, Jackson misses you too," she said softly. "He just doesn't know how to say it yet." My voice dropped to a whisper. "Tell him he doesn't have to. I already know." There was a long silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that only comes when love fills every empty space. Then, just before hanging up, she said something that wrapped around my heart like a shawl. "I read that poem I wrote you. My grandma is a rainbow." I didn't understand it back then, but I do now. "You really are all the colors." I couldn't speak. I just covered my mouth and let the tears fall silently. "Can I come over again next weekend?" she asked. I finally found my voice. "Every weekend if you'd like. The door's always open." She laughed. "Good, because I'm bringing Jackson too. He wants pie." We said goodbye, but it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table, touched the phone like it was something holy. I looked at the second teacup, still full, still warm, and smiled. The silence had been broken, not with an apology from Susan, not with a letter from Brian, but with a single, brave call from a granddaughter who remembered who I was. And in that moment, I understood something powerful. Love leaves traces too strong to erase. They tried to shut me out, but my voice, my letters, my stories, they had waited patiently. And now, they were being heard again. This morning, I walked to the town library and asked if I could submit something to the local newspaper. "It's not a complaint," I said, "and it's not political. It's just a story, a true one." The editor, a young man named Alex, nodded kindly and handed me a form. I filled it out, signed my name, Margaret Whitlow, and tucked my essay inside. The piece ran in the Sunday column under the title, "I'm Still Here." It wasn't bitter. It wasn't angry. It was a quiet declaration from someone who had been loved, then forgotten, and now found again. I wrote about rocking chairs and bedtime songs, peanut butter cookies and school plays, the joy of handwritten letters, and the ache of unanswered phones, to be erased not by death, but by distance dressed as politeness. I wrote about silence, and I wrote about how even silence can be broken by a child's voice, by truth, by love that refuses to stay buried. The essay ended like this. To anyone reading this who's been shut out of a life they helped build, know this: your love did not vanish. It planted itself in memory, in habit, in heart. And one day, someone will water it. One day, someone will remember. I was blocked. I was dismissed. But I am still here. I am a grandmother. And I do not vanish quietly. That afternoon, Cheryl from the post office came by with tears in her eyes. "I read it twice," she said. "Once for the story and once for myself." The librarian left a copy in the window. the pastor mentioned it during his Sunday sermon. Even Maya, the phone store clerk, called the house just to say, "Thank you." But none of that compared to the moment Ellie called again. "Grandma?" she said breathlessly. "You're famous!" I laughed. "Hardly." "No," she insisted. "You're brave." Later that week, she and Jackson came over. We baked together. We played cards. We watched an old cartoon they hadn't seen since they were toddlers. Jackson crawled onto the couch and laid his head on my shoulder. Ellie held my hand. Brian hasn't called yet. Susan still glares from across church pews. That may never change. But I've changed, because I no longer wait by the phone, hoping for crumbs of acknowledgement. I no longer question the value of the love I gave. I found my voice. And more importantly, they heard it. I was once erased, but now I've written myself back into the story, and this time I'll never be edited out again.